Welcome to this relaxing journey into the world of Gigantamax Pokemon. Tonight, we will drift into the towering forms that reshape battles and legends, uncovering secrets and obscure details about the creatures, from designs inspired by folklore and culture to mechanics that quietly changed how we play. Each fact adds another layer to these colossal transformations. Let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from tonight, and if you enjoy these calming explorations, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next video. When the world of Gigantamax forms was first revealed in Galar, the concept felt like a natural evolution of Mega Evolutions and Z-moves, yet it carried its own distinct identity. These forms were not just larger versions of familiar partners, but entirely reimagined appearances that connected them to myths, cultural references, and unique gameplay mechanics. Each one brought with it a signature GMAX move, replacing their standard max moves with special effects that could change the course of battle. For players, encountering these forms was more than just spectacle. It was a way of experiencing Pokemon in a new light, where hidden details and subtle inspirations told stories as grand as their size. The first form most players encountered was Charizard, given special prominence as the partner of Leon, the champion of Galar. Already one of the most iconic creatures in the franchise, it was chosen as a symbol of continuity between old and new. Its Gigantamax form was engulfed in wings of living flame, the fire itself creating dragon-like shapes that seemed to flap independently of its body. This was no coincidence. The design team intentionally leaned into imagery of mythological dragons from both Eastern and Western traditions. The glowing fire wings also echoed visual motifs from kaiju films, where giant monsters wreathed in energy destroyed cities with unstoppable force. Its signature move, GMAX Wildfire, dealt immediate damage and then continued to harm opponents for several turns, representing a firestorm that lingered after the initial attack. This ability was one of the earliest examples of Gigantamax moves that felt narratively tied to their design, even though it technically remained fire and flying rather than gaining a dragon typing. Fans saw this incarnation as the closest realization of the dragon fantasy that had surrounded it since Kanto. Pikachu, another central mascot, received a transformation that leaned heavily on nostalgia. Its body became plump and rounded again, recalling the design of its earliest sprites in the original games. For longtime players, this form was a deliberate callback, a reminder of when the franchise was still new and its mascot had yet to be slimmed down into the sleeker version seen in modern artwork and the anime. Its glowing lightning bolt-shaped tail reached enormous size, almost like a neon sign announcing its presence. The GMAX Volt Crash not only struck with devastating electrical power, but also guaranteed paralysis across all opponents, a mechanical reflection of overwhelming voltage disrupting everything around it. Fans who grew up with the chubby mouse design saw this as both an affectionate tribute and a powerful reimagining. It showed how Gigantamaxing could function as both a nostalgic nod and a new way of experiencing a familiar companion. Meowth was another case where humor and culture intersected. Its body elongated into an absurdly stretched figure, so long that it seemed almost serpentine, with glowing eyes and a coin that shimmered ominously on its forehead. The design drew directly from Maneki Neko statues, the beckoning cat charms in Japanese culture thought to bring fortune. The twist was exaggeration, whereas a real lucky cat raises its paw. This version extended its whole body skyward as though waving endlessly. Its GMAX Gold Rush was both comical and useful, scattering coins around the battlefield while also confusing opponents. This tied together themes of wealth and mischief that had followed this creature since its introduction, especially through its payday move and anime depictions of its cunning personality. Few Gigantamax forms leaned as hard into parody as this one, making it stand out as an example of how not every design was meant to be intimidating. Some were crafted for humor and cultural resonance. Butterfree was chosen as one of the earliest reveals to showcase the beauty of Gigantamaxing. Its wings expanded to vast size, glowing with a luminous pattern that suggested iridescence and powdery scales. The inspiration here was partly the Atlas moth, one of the largest moths in the world, as well as folkloric associations between butterflies and dreams. The status-inducing GMAX befuddle perfectly matched this aesthetic, as the creature could spread sleep, paralysis, or poison to opponents at random, echoing myths about moths and butterflies whose dust carried magical or dangerous effects. For an early game insect that had often been dismissed as weak, this form elevated it into something majestic, reminding players that even the most common companions could possess hidden grandeur. Snorlax was another example of a transformation that went beyond simple size increase. Its Gigantamax form looked as though it had fallen asleep so long that the land itself had begun to grow across its body. Trees, bushes, and even a small path covered its stomach, turning it into a living island. This design reflected the environmental themes that often run quietly through the franchise. The idea that nature could reclaim even a living being resonated with players, and its GMAX Replenish tied directly to its lore by restoring berries while striking foes. The move itself emphasized sustainability and abundance, themes long associated with the creature's relationship to food and rest. Its sheer scale, with mountains of greenery growing from its belly, made it one of the most visually impressive Gigantamax designs, showing the diversity of approaches the developers took. Eevee's transformation offered a different tone, less about intimidation, more about warmth. Its mane and fur puffed outward until it resembled an enormous, fluffy companion. The exaggerated cuteness was intentional, emphasizing its role as a secondary mascot alongside Pikachu. Its GMAX cuddle had the unique effect of infatuating opponents of the opposite gender, which made perfect sense for a creature that symbolized companionship, adaptability, and affection. This form was initially available only through a special event distribution, tying its identity to exclusivity and community engagement. While not a powerhouse in battle, its design represented the softer side of Gigantamaxing, proving that the phenomenon was not limited to destructive imagery, but could also magnify traits of love and loyalty. Alcremie offered one of the most strikingly whimsical transformations. Already designed around desserts and sweetness, its Gigantamax form became a towering multi-tiered cake, decorated with strawberries, whipped cream, and shining accents. The choice to resemble a wedding cake connected it to themes of celebration and abundance, and its GMAX finale matched the symbolism by healing allies while harming opponents. This balance between offense and support reflected the idea of sharing joy while still asserting strength. The creature's status as one of the only fairy types with a Gigantamax form gave it unique prominence, while the lore behind its edible appearance reinforced the blending of culinary culture into Pokémon design. The fact that this form could heal allies made it particularly valuable in doubles battles, where support mechanics often determine success. Corviknight leaned into darker, more foreboding aesthetics. Already positioned as one of the iconic Pokémon of Galar, its Gigantamax form turned it into a looming, armored raven with sharp metallic extensions spreading from its wings. The design carried echoes of Gothic architecture and folklore where ravens symbolize death, omens, and vigilance. Its GMAX wind rage struck powerfully while also removing barriers, entry hazards, and protective effects from the battlefield. Mechanically, this made it a counter to common defensive strategies, and narratively, it connected to the idea of ravens stripping away safety to deliver warnings of doom. It quickly became a fan favorite, both for its sleek design and for its competitive relevance. Drednaw offered another kaiju-inspired presence. Normally a quadruped, its Gigantamax form stood upright like a dinosaur, its jagged shell rising like a fortress. The reference was clear: snapping turtles, combined with reptilian kaiju that towered over cities in Japanese films. Its GMAX Stone Surge created sharp rocks across the battlefield, replicating the effect of stealth rock. This gave it unusual utility, as few Gigantamax forms had signature moves that directly set hazards. For competitive players, this provided a reason to consider it in battle beyond sheer spectacle. Its upright stance and hulking frame emphasized the monstrous side of Gigantamaxing, taking an already formidable design and turning it into something straight out of monster cinema. Centiskorch, meanwhile, delivered one of the most dramatic transformations. Its serpentine body extended and coiled upward, glowing with fiery loops that suggested infinity. The inspiration here came from the Japanese Mukade, a legendary giant centipede said to be so enormous it could battle dragons. The Gigantamax design paid homage to this myth directly, turning an otherwise niche firebug type into something terrifying and legendary. Its GMAX Centinferno trapped foes in a vortex of fire, preventing escape while dealing constant damage. This tied its mythological inspiration to gameplay mechanics, reinforcing the sense of doom that accompanied its appearance. Fans noted that this was one of the most impressive examples of Gigantamaxing's ability to elevate a relatively new Pokémon into a legendary presence. Taken together, these first transformations demonstrated the full range of the concept. Some leaned into nostalgia, like Pikachu and Eevee. Others embodied humor and cultural references, like Meowth. Still others focused on majesty, myth, or intimidation, like Butterfree, Corviknight, and Centiskorch. Snorlax brought environmental themes, while Alcremie embodied celebration and joy. Each one showcased not just creativity and design, but also mechanical innovations through their unique GMAX moves. Players quickly realized that Gigantamaxing was not a uniform system, but a celebration of diversity, with each form telling its own story through aesthetics and battle function. As the Gigantamax phenomenon spread across Galar, more species revealed transformations that blended creativity with subtle layers of meaning. Some forms highlighted humor, while others leaned into fear or majesty. For many players, the thrill was in noticing the hidden inspirations behind these colossal figures, discovering that every curve, detail, and move told a story that connected back to real-world culture or the history of the franchise. One of the most striking forms belonged to Grimmsnarl, already designed with an unsettling appearance that drew upon goblins and trolls of European folklore. Its transformation amplified those traits into something monstrous. Its hair, which normally functioned as muscle-like extensions, grew into massive tendrils that wrapped around its frame, making it resemble a demon towering above the battlefield. Its GMAX snooze inflicted damage while also carrying the chance to put opponents to sleep, reflecting the sinister theme of lulling enemies into unconsciousness. This design was not just about size, but about distortion, as though the creature's inner darkness had finally spilled outward in exaggerated form. Machamp received a Gigantamax form that honored its long legacy in the series. Its muscles bulged to an impossible degree, glowing with fiery energy that made each punch appear like a comet streaking through the air. The glowing veins across its arms suggested raw power channeling through its body. Its GMAX Chi Strike boosted the critical hit rate of its team while dealing damage, tying directly into the lore of a fighter so skilled that every blow carried heightened precision. For a Pokemon introduced in the very first generation, this form was both a modernization and an acknowledgement of its place as one of the franchise's enduring martial icons. Coalossal brought industrial themes to the forefront. Its body became a towering volcano of smoldering rock, glowing veins of magma coursing across its surface. This design reflected the coal mining heritage of Britain, the cultural inspiration for Galar. Its GMAX Volcalith not only struck with devastating power, but also inflicted residual damage over several turns on any foe not resistant to rock. This mechanic represented falling debris, lava flows, and fiery projectiles continuing to scorch the battlefield long after the initial eruption. For players, this form was a clear statement about the environmental cost of industry, a creature born from coal that became both a weapon and a symbol of human reliance on natural resources. Hatterene offered one of the eeriest Gigantamax forms, known already as the Forest Witch. Its transformation turned its hair-like tendrils into enormous appendages that resembled towers or spires. Its eyes glowed with a haunting intensity, and its presence seemed to stretch across the battlefield like a psychic mist. Its GMAX Smite did more than damage. It also confused opponents, adding to the sense of disorientation and fear that accompanied its presence. The design emphasized its fairy and psychic traits in ways that made it feel both divine and terrifying, like a figure from folklore that punishes those who intrude upon sacred spaces. For many, it became one of the most memorable examples of Gigantamaxing used to magnify atmosphere and lore. Kingler delivered a design that balanced absurdity with menace. Its claws, already oversized compared to its body, grew to impossible proportions, foaming with bubbles that spilled across the battlefield. This imagery tied back to real crabs, releasing foam as a defensive response, but here it was exaggerated into a spectacle of overwhelming force. Its GMAX foam burst drenched the field, lowering the speed of opponents and reinforcing the idea of slowing prey through tidal waves of froth. Long overlooked in competitive play, this form gave it a moment of spotlight, even if just for the humor of a crustacean turned into a tidal force of bubbles. Lapras was granted one of the most beloved Gigantamax designs, both for its elegance and for the competitive utility it brought. Its shell expanded into a massive musical stage, glowing with icy motifs that suggested waves of sound and aurora-like energy. The design connected to its reputation as a gentle creature that once carried humans across seas, now reimagined as a living concert hall. Its GMAX resonance not only struck opponents, but also set up a protective barrier, similar to the combined effects of light screen and reflect. This immediately made it one of the strongest Gigantamax options in doubles battles, where protection and utility often outweighed raw offense. Beyond mechanics, fans saw in this form a poetic image, a gentle guardian that shielded allies with the resonance of its song. Gengar brought classic ghostly imagery into the modern era. Its Gigantamax form resembled a gigantic maw, opening to swallow the battlefield, its tongue rolling out like a carpet, leading directly into darkness. This exaggerated its mischievous and sinister qualities, turning it into something closer to yokai from Japanese folklore, where ghosts and monsters often had distorted, grotesque features. Its GMAX terror inflicted damage while preventing opponents from escaping, fitting for a ghost that traps souls. Players noted how its design tied perfectly to its long history of being one of the most unsettling yet beloved creatures in the series. Flapple and Appletun shared a single Gigantamax form, though its details shifted depending on which version a player had evolved. This design resembled a giant pie, bubbling with syrup and steam, tying into British culinary traditions of apple pies and crumbles. The GMAX tartness move lowered the evasiveness of opponents while dealing damage, a reflection of sour flavors overwhelming the senses. This culinary theme made it one of the more light-hearted forms, but it also tied directly to the food motifs that ran throughout the Galar region, from curry making in the wild area to bakery-inspired designs. It was an example of how Gigantamaxing could be playful, connecting Pokemon not only to mythology, but also to everyday culture. Sandaconda, normally known for curling into a coiled form, uncoiled into a towering funnel of spiraling sand. Its Gigantamax body looked like a living tornado, dust and grit swirling in a destructive vortex. Its GMAX Sandblast trapped foes in a storm of sand that continued to damage over time, echoing the natural hazards of deserts. This tied back to its lore of storing sand in its body, now unleashed in catastrophic amounts. The design carried visual similarity to sandstorms seen in the Galar region itself, reinforcing the idea that Gigantamax forms drew not just from mythology, but from the land they inhabited. Each of these transformations added new perspectives to familiar faces. Grimmsnarl turned into a demon of nightmare, Machamp became the ultimate fighter, Coalossal reflected industrial firepower, Hatterene embodied the menace of witches, Kingler exaggerated natural defense, Lapras became a living stage, Gengar consumed everything in its maw, Flapple and Appletun celebrated culinary traditions, and Sandaconda unleashed the fury of the desert. Together, they showcased how Gigantamaxing was not a uniform phenomenon, but a creative tapestry where humor, horror, and majesty all found equal footing. Few transformations capture the unsettling creativity of Gigantamaxing as much as Gengar. Already a mischievous ghost that had haunted players since the earliest days of the series, its new form turned it into something straight from folklore. Instead of simply enlarging its frame, the designers emphasized its most sinister trait, its mouth. The entire body became a gaping maw, glowing eyes above, and a rolling tongue extending outward as if inviting prey to step inside. Legends have long tied ghostly beings to the concept of gateways between this world and the next, and this imagery gave that idea physical form. Its signature GMAX terror trapped opponents on the battlefield, preventing them from escaping, which matched perfectly with the concept of being swallowed whole or dragged into the underworld. For many, this design cemented its place as one of the most thematically perfect Gigantamax forms, transforming a playful specter into something both horrifying and awe-inspiring. Lapras provided a counterpoint to the terror of Gengar, embodying elegance and harmony rather than fear. Its shell expanded into a glowing stage, etched with patterns that resembled stained glass windows and icy auroras. Lights radiated outward like the northern skies, giving it an appearance both regal and serene. Its GMAX resonance not only damaged opponents, but also established a protective field that combined the benefits of light screen and reflect. In competitive battles, this ability elevated it into one of the strongest choices in doubles, protecting teams from both physical and special damage. Beyond its mechanics, its design drew from cultural associations with music and companionship, reinforcing its lore as a gentle guardian that ferries travelers across dangerous waters. By magnifying these traits, its Gigantamax form turned it into a visual metaphor for protection, one that resonated strongly with players around the world. While these two forms stood at opposite ends of tone, together they revealed how flexible the concept of Gigantamaxing could be. Some designs leaned into fear, others into majesty, but all were more than just cosmetic. Each form came paired with a unique move, giving it a purpose beyond spectacle. These GMAX moves replaced the standard max moves of Dynamax Pokémon and often introduced entirely new battlefield effects. The mechanics were subtle but powerful, altering the flow of matches in ways that could not be replicated by ordinary strategies. One of the most fascinating aspects of Gigantamaxing was its rarity. Not every member of a species could take on the form, only special individuals carrying what the games described as a Gigantamax factor. This meant that even after encountering the species, players could spend hours searching raids for the rare version that could transform. In practice, this turned Gigantamax Pokémon into collector's prizes, adding to their mystique. Some were even event exclusive, available only for limited times, which made them symbols of community participation as much as mechanics. For example, certain distributions were tied to early game releases, online events, or special promotions, meaning not every trainer had equal access. This exclusivity was a deliberate echo of how rare forms in the Pokemon world inspire legends and myths. Gigantamax raids themselves were spectacles. Players had to work together in max raid battles, teaming up online or with friends to bring down colossal foes. These encounters emphasized community in ways the series had not done before, creating moments where four trainers faced an overwhelming opponent and had to coordinate moves to succeed. Many fans noted how this dynamic mirrored the lore of facing kaiju in popular Japanese media, where groups unite against a monster too strong for a single hero. The scale of these battles, combined with the dramatic imagery of a stadium filled with energy, reinforced the grandeur of the concept. Another detail that fascinated players was how Gigantamax forms carried subtle references to British culture. The inspiration for Galar, some, like Alcremie's cake design, were obvious, but others were more hidden. Corviknight's armored raven appearance echoed Gothic cathedrals and folklore. Coalossal reflected the mining history of the industrial age, and Meowth's elongated body referenced cultural symbols of wealth. Even the humor of certain designs, like Kingler's foaming claws or Pikachu's nostalgic chubbiness, reflected British comedy's fondness for exaggeration and parody. This blending of cultural nods created a sense that Gigantamaxing was not just a battle mechanic, but a storytelling tool woven into the identity of the region. From a competitive standpoint, Gigantamaxing introduced fascinating balance shifts. Unlike Mega Evolutions, which permanently altered stats, or Z moves, which offered one huge strike per battle, Gigantamaxing lasted only 3 turns. This meant players had to plan carefully when to activate it. Do you unleash overwhelming offense early, hoping to snowball momentum, or save it for a final push when defenses are low? Adding to this complexity, certain Gigantamax moves provided utility that could not be replicated. Snorlax's ability to restore berries, Lapras's protective field, or Butterfree's spread of status effects all altered strategies in unique ways. While some forms were not considered competitively strong, others defined entire formats for months at a time. The lore of Gigantamaxing itself added another layer of mystery. In-game researchers suggested that the phenomenon was tied to Galar particles and energy from the region's power plants, drawing subtle connections to themes of industrialization and environmental manipulation. Stadiums with Dynamax bands acted as focal points, hinting that the phenomenon was not entirely natural, but instead the result of human intervention with ancient forces. This mirrored earlier themes from the series, where humanity's attempt to control nature often led to unintended consequences. Gigantamax Pokémon, then, were not just oversized forms, but living symbols of humanity's relationship with power, culture, and the environment. Players also discovered quirks hidden in animations. For example, some forms displayed subtle nods to past artwork or regional myths. Pikachu's glowing cheeks recalled its role as an electric mascot. Butterfree's scales glowed like moth dust in folklore, and Meowth's body stretched to comedic extremes as though embodying greed itself. These were not random choices, but deliberate layers of storytelling, designed to reward those who paid close attention. Even the stadium settings emphasized this, with glowing red energy spirals surrounding Gigantamax Pokémon, reinforcing the sense that these transformations tapped into forces beyond ordinary comprehension. In the years since their introduction, Gigantamax forms have become a beloved chapter of the franchise. Some fans lament that they were exclusive to a single generation, while others celebrate them as a unique experiment that fit perfectly with Galar's theme of spectacle and sport. Unlike Mega Evolution or Z moves, which focused on individual battles, Gigantamaxing was tied to the concept of arenas, cheering crowds, and the theater of competition. It was not just about power, but about performance, a reflection of how the culture of Galar celebrated Pokémon as both partners and entertainers. Looking back, the forms of Gengar and Lapras highlight two extremes of the phenomenon. One embodied terror, with a maw that trapped souls, while the other radiated harmony, shielding allies with resonant song. Between them lay the entire spectrum of Gigantamaxing, from horror to beauty, comedy to majesty. And surrounding them were the mechanics, cultural nods, competitive strategies, and community events that gave these forms life. For players, they were not just temporary transformations, but snapshots of what Pokémon could represent at their largest and most imaginative. Among the Gigantamax transformations, few stood out as much for their humor as Meowth. This form stretched its body into a ridiculous, elongated figure, rising like a tower above the battlefield. The design was not random. It was inspired by the Maneki Neko charms of Japanese culture, the beckoning cat, often seen at shop entrances, said to bring luck and wealth. The exaggerated stretching of its body parodied this idea, making it appear as though it was endlessly raising its paw skyward. Its GMAX Gold Rush fit the theme perfectly, scattering coins across the field while confusing opponents. This tied back to its long association with money, from the payday move to its greedy reputation in the anime. What made this transformation particularly obscure was how it functioned as an event-exclusive distribution early in Sword and Shield's release. Only those who claimed the special gift could access it, making it one of the rarer forms in practice. Players who missed the window had to wait for later events, reinforcing how Gigantamaxing was not just tied to lore and design, but also to the community's timing and participation. Butterfree, on the other hand, showcased beauty and grace. Its wings expanded to incredible size, glowing with luminous patterns that evoked both bioluminescent insects and folkloric myths of moths that lead travelers astray. The inspiration seemed to draw partly from the Atlas moth, one of the largest real-world species, as well as the cultural association of butterflies with transformation and fragility. In battle, its GMAX befuddle inflicted random status conditions, spreading sleep, paralysis, or poison across enemies. The connection between its delicate powdery wings and debilitating effects was a clever design choice, transforming what might seem like a harmless bug into a dangerous battlefield disruptor. For many fans, this form elevated it from an early game companion to a creature worthy of legend, proving that Gigantamaxing could give prestige to Pokémon that had rarely been celebrated in the competitive scene. Beyond individual designs, Gigantamaxing carried layers of cultural and gameplay significance that often went unnoticed at first. One of the most interesting aspects was the way these forms blurred the line between sport and mythology. In Galar, stadiums were central to the culture, complete with roaring crowds, banners, and ceremonies. Gigantamax Pokémon appeared as performers in these coliseums, their massive bodies framed by the glow of artificial energy. Unlike past mechanics, which were framed as hidden powers or mystical bonds, Gigantamaxing was tied directly to public spectacle. This was a deliberate design choice, reflecting Britain's history of football stadiums and televised competition. It turned Pokémon battles into something closer to entertainment, where the grandeur of transformation was as important as strategy. Gigantamax moves themselves added layers of complexity to this spectacle. Each move carried unique properties, often combining raw power with secondary effects. For example, some moves established battlefield conditions like hazards, while others offered protective barriers or status effects. These mechanics forced trainers to adapt strategies in real time. Unlike Mega Evolutions, which boosted stats permanently, or Z moves, which were one-time finishers, Gigantamax powers lasted for 3 turns. This limitation introduced tension. Activating it too early risked wasting it, while saving it too long could mean missing the right moment to shift momentum. Many matches turned not on raw power but on timing and prediction, which mirrored the way real-world sports often hinge on key plays and strategy rather than brute strength alone. Rarity also became an important part of the phenomenon. Not every member of a species could Gigantamax, only those carrying the Gigantamax factor. This meant hunting for rare encounters and raids, where special glowing dens indicated the presence of potential forms. These hunts could take hours, sometimes days, with drop rates that challenged even the most dedicated trainers. In some cases, the forms were tied to limited time events, meaning that they became markers of community history. Owning one of these forms became not only a matter of gameplay, but also a badge of participation, a memory of logging in during a certain period and taking part in a shared moment of the fandom. Another obscure fact is how Gigantamax forms often carried environmental storytelling. Snorlax's overgrown body, with trees sprouting from it, implied centuries of slumber. Lapras's glowing shell suggested concerts and festivals. Centiskorch's coiling body tied to legends of endless serpents in Japanese mythology. These were not just artistic choices, but reflections of how Pokémon exist within the world's lore. Unlike Dynamax, which was about size, Gigantamaxing was about identity taking traits already associated with a creature and magnifying them into a form that told a story on its own. The mechanics of max raid battles also played a role in shaping community culture. Facing down a Gigantamax opponent with friends or online allies was a new kind of cooperative play. Each participant could only bring one Pokemon, and only one trainer could trigger Dynamax or Gigantamax, creating moments of negotiation and teamwork. These battles reinforce the theme of cooperation against overwhelming odds, not unlike folklore tales of villages uniting to face monsters. Success often required planning, communication, and persistence, especially for the rarest Gigantamax encounters. Some Gigantamax moves had unexpected effects that shifted competitive balance. Lapras's ability to set dual screens with one move turned it into a central figure in doubles formats. Butterfree's ability to spread status conditions made it surprisingly effective in certain team compositions. Even forms like Kingler, often dismissed in standard play, gained temporary usefulness through the speed-lowering effects of GMAX Foam Burst. These competitive quirks made the phenomenon more than just visual spectacle. They introduced layers of strategy that rippled across battle formats, giving otherwise overlooked Pokemon moments of relevance. Community reception to Gigantamaxing was mixed at first, as some players compared it unfavorably to Mega Evolutions, but over time, its unique flavor won appreciation. The combination of rarity, spectacle, and cultural references made it distinct. Many saw it as a mechanic tailored specifically to Galar, much like how Alolan forms reflected Hawaii's influence, or Z-moves echoed traditional dances. Gigantamaxing belonged to stadiums, lights, and festivals. Even if the mechanic did not return in later generations, it left a lasting impression as a defining part of Galar's identity. These layers, rarity, spectacle, cultural nods, mechanical quirks, and community events show why Gigantamaxing is remembered so fondly. Forms like Meowth's absurd stretching body or Butterfree's glowing wings became symbols of just how far the designers were willing to push the boundaries of creativity. In their exaggeration, they captured something essential about Pokemon: the ability to surprise, delight, and unsettle, all within the same phenomenon. Few transformations embodied spectacle more dramatically than Charizard's. As one of the most recognizable Pokemon in the entire franchise, its Gigantamax form was given special attention. Flames engulfed its wings, turning them into massive blazing sails that reached skyward like molten magma. Unlike its mega evolutions, which had focused on physical form or elemental alignment, this design leaned fully into its fiery power, emphasizing the mythological archetype of the dragon as a destructive force of nature. The glowing wings were not merely aesthetic. In the lore, they represented the intensity of its inner fire, spilling outward in a form that could scorch the heavens. Its GMAX wildfire further cemented this identity, creating a lingering battlefield hazard that burned opponents each turn, representing a fire that refused to die down. For many players, this move gave it a unique presence in competitive formats, serving both as a powerful attack and as area control, reshaping the rhythm of battles long after the initial strike. The decision to spotlight this form in promotional material reflected how closely it was tied to Galar's identity. Leon, the region's champion, made it the cornerstone of his team, ensuring that anyone who played through the main story would encounter its power firsthand. This tied Gigantamaxing not only to spectacle, but also to narrative significance. Just as Red's Pikachu or Cynthia's Garchomp symbolized their respective generations. Leon's fiery partner embodied the grandeur of Galar. Fans often debated whether this prominence overshadowed other Gigantamax forms, but it undeniably anchored the mechanic in cultural memory. Event raids also played a role in reinforcing its status, with dedicated events ensuring that players across the globe had multiple opportunities to catch it, highlighting how central it was to community participation. Machamp's Gigantamax form offered a very different kind of symbolism. Instead of fire and spectacle, it drew upon the imagery of professional wrestling and martial arts. Its body glowed with streaks of fiery energy as it raised its fists skyward, projecting the aura of a champion in the spotlight. The exaggeration of its muscles, already iconic in its standard form, became a living monument to physical strength. Its GMAX Chi Strike was a clever design, boosting the critical hit ratio of itself and allies, turning battles into showcases of high-risk, high-reward offense. This move connected neatly with its theme of a crowd-pleasing fighter, as critical hits always carried the excitement of dramatic reversals. The cultural roots of this design were deeply tied to Galar's stadium setting. Wrestling and boxing are ingrained in British sporting tradition, from famous prize fights to the spectacle of choreographed entertainment matches. By giving Machamp this exaggerated form, the developers aligned it with those traditions, transforming it into a symbol of sportsmanship and theatrical combat. Its visual design, complete with glowing patterns across its fists and arms, evoked the idea of a fighter radiating with inner energy, the very embodiment of stamina and discipline. Both of these Gigantamax forms revealed how varied the inspirations for the mechanic were. One leaned into myth, fire, and spectacle, making itself an icon of destructive beauty. The other embraced human sporting traditions, reflecting how Pokémon in Galar were not just creatures of fantasy, but participants in a culture that celebrated strength and competition. Together, they showed how Gigantamaxing could act as a bridge between mythological archetypes and real-world influences, creating designs that resonated both within the world of Pokémon and with the players who experienced them. The rarity of encountering these forms in max raid battles reinforced their prestige. Players often spent countless hours searching dens, coordinating with friends, or waiting for special events that boosted their appearance rates. This sense of pursuit turned Gigantamax hunting into a form of communal storytelling. Discussions online often revolved around strategies to find or defeat them, with screenshots of successful captures shared like trophies. The rarity of Machamp's form, for example, made it a point of pride among collectors, while the prominence of Charizard's meant that nearly everyone eventually had access to it, though its competitive usefulness ensured that players continued to seek optimal versions with the best stats. What made these forms particularly fascinating was how they blurred the line between gameplay, utility, and cultural symbolism. Charizard's lingering wildfire effect forced players to rethink defensive strategies, while Machamp's critical hit boosts encouraged aggressive play. At the same time, they served as narrative anchors, one tied to the champion's identity, the other to the themes of combat and spectacle that defined Galar's stadium culture. Few mechanics in Pokémon history have balanced competitive relevance, cultural storytelling, and community participation so seamlessly. From a broader perspective, these transformations also highlighted one of the most overlooked aspects of Gigantamaxing, how it amplified not just power, but personality. Regular Dynamaxing made Pokémon bigger, but Gigantamaxing made them distinct, Charizard's fiery wings told a story of mythic destruction. Machamp's glowing fists told a story of discipline and strength. Both stood as monuments to how Pokemon can embody human culture, myth, and imagination while still remaining grounded in mechanics that mattered on the battlefield. Among the many transformations introduced in Galar, Butterfree's Gigantamax form was one of the most striking examples of a Pokemon gaining an entirely new aura through sheer scale and design. Normally seen as a delicate creature, this form magnified its wings into enormous, luminous sails patterned with kaleidoscopic colors that glowed like stained glass under a spotlight. Its GMAX befuddle became one of the most unusual signature moves in the entire roster. Instead of focusing on raw power, it introduced a random status condition, sleep, paralysis, or poison on every opposing creature. This unpredictability made it a tactical tool in both raids and competitive formats, capable of turning the tide of battle simply by altering the state of every opponent on the field. The randomness mirrored its appearance, dazzling yet dangerous, beautiful yet menacing. The inspiration behind this form connected to both biology and mythology. In nature, butterflies often use their bright wings to confuse predators, creating the illusion of larger, more threatening creatures. The Gigantamax version pushed this to the extreme, presenting wings that seemed impossibly large and glowing patterns that suggested hypnotic influence. Fans often compared it to kaiju moths in Japanese cinema, particularly those that embodied the dual role of beauty and terror. In this way, the design tied Pokemon's long-running love of nature to popular culture, making the form feel both familiar and original. Event raids for this transformation were some of the earliest in the series, helping to establish Gigantamaxing as a global event. Players rushed to catch it not just for its rarity, but also because of its usefulness. The ability to impose multiple potential statuses in a single move made it highly effective in cooperative raid battles, where status effects could determine the difference between victory and failure. Community discussions often revolved around its unpredictability, with some trainers celebrating its versatility and others lamenting the lack of control. The divide only reinforced how unusual this design was, showing that Gigantamaxing was not simply about raw power, but about adding strategic wrinkles to familiar creatures. Snorlax's Gigantamax form, in contrast, turned one of the franchise's most iconic jokes into a monumental spectacle. Famous since the earliest games for blocking paths and forcing trainers to find ways to move it, Snorlax had always symbolized immovable presence. Its transformation built upon this, showing it lying on its back with an entire ecosystem sprouting across its enormous belly. Trees, grassy fields, and even tiny rivers appeared, as though nature itself had decided to use the creature as a landscape. The effect was both humorous and awe-inspiring, blending whimsy with environmental symbolism. Its GMAX replenish carried mechanical weight, restoring any berries consumed by the user or its allies. This not only tied into its lore of insatiable appetite, but also gave it a unique role in prolonged battles where sustainability mattered. The imagery of an ecosystem growing on its body invited interpretations about balance and harmony. Fans often speculated that it represented the idea of nature reclaiming space, turning even a sleeping titan into fertile ground. Comparisons to mythological figures who carried the world on their backs circulated widely, further connecting the design to themes larger than the creature itself. At the same time, the comedic roots of its identity were preserved. It was still lying down, still asleep, still embodying sloth. The Gigantamax design did not overwrite its personality, but expanded it, giving it new symbolic resonance without losing its charm. In competitive play, this form introduced interesting dynamics. The ability to recycle berries through GMAX Replenish provided synergy with items like the Figgy or Citrus Berry, creating strategies where Snorlax could survive far longer than expected. Teams built around this mechanic emphasized endurance and recovery, contrasting sharply with the offensive focus of many other Gigantamax forms. The creature that once blocked paths now blocked entire strategies, forcing opponents to plan around its resilience. The rarity of encountering this form in raids also heightened its mystique. Unlike some transformations that were showcased immediately, Snorlax's was tied to timed events, making it an object of pursuit during specific windows. This scarcity encouraged cooperative play, as trainers coordinated online to ensure everyone could capture one before the event ended. Screenshots of successful captures circulated widely, reinforcing its role as a communal achievement. Together, the transformations of Butterfree and Snorlax demonstrated the range of design philosophies within Gigantamaxing. One emphasized unpredictability and status manipulation through luminous wings, embodying both natural beauty and kaiju-inspired menace. The other leaned into humor and mythology, turning a sleeping giant into a literal ecosystem while introducing endurance-focused mechanics. Both forms connected to the broader themes of Galar spectacle, cooperation, and cultural symbolism, while also respecting the personalities of the creatures they enhanced. More than most, these designs revealed how Gigantamaxing was not simply about making Pokémon larger, but about deepening their identities. By exaggerating traits that had always defined them, Butterfree's beauty and Snorlax's immovability, the developers created forms that felt inevitable in hindsight, as though they had always been waiting to be discovered. Their popularity in both narrative and competitive contexts ensured that they became enduring symbols of the mechanic's potential, celebrated not just for their scale, but for the creativity they embodied. When the concept of Gigantamaxing was first introduced in the Galar region, many trainers immediately focused on the massive titans that became staples of the feature: towering dragons, imposing fighters, and mystical icons of strength. Yet, tucked within this roster of giants are forms that carry a sense of creativity and surprise, stretching the very boundaries of what a Pokémon could become when enlarged to mythic size. Among these, a pair of creatures stand out not only for their striking appearances, but also for the hidden stories and mechanics that surround them. Both showcase how the Gigantamax phenomenon can take an otherwise familiar Pokémon and transform it into something that feels entirely new, layered with symbolic meaning and hidden quirks. The first of these is Pikachu, whose Gigantamax form is steeped in both nostalgia and innovation. At its core, this transformation pays homage to the series' earliest designs, reverting the creature's appearance to its plumper, rounder look from the red and blue era. The rounded belly, shorter stature, and small, beady eyes replicate the style of Ken Sugimori's original artwork, instantly sparking recognition among longtime fans. This design choice was more than a cosmetic decision. It was a deliberate nod to the franchise's history, acknowledging how far the series has come while celebrating its roots. In many ways, Gigantamax Pikachu exists less as a new creation and more as a time capsule, carrying forward the image of the electric mascot that captured imaginations back in the late 1990 seconds. Mechanically, This form introduced a signature move called GMAX Volt Crash, which paralyzes all opponents upon use. Unlike typical attacks that deal damage or provide a single target effect, Volt Crash was built as a crowd control mechanic, reinforcing the idea that the mascot, when magnified to legendary proportions, could dominate the field with both power and disruption. This gave the form strategic significance in doubles battles, where controlling multiple opponents at once is often the deciding factor between victory and defeat. Competitive trainers took note of how the move provided free utility, though the form itself remained niche due to its limited availability and reliance on specific game versions. Still, the fact that the mascot had such a powerful and disruptive tool added weight to its role as the symbolic face of the franchise. The lore implications of this form are equally fascinating. Gigantamaxing is explained in-universe as the result of a unique energy tied to Galar's Dynamax phenomenon, often influenced by particles called Galar particles. For Pikachu, the transformation into its classic chubby design suggests that these energies tap into ancestral or primordial versions of Pokémon, pulling out qualities long thought left behind by modern evolution. In this sense, Gigantamax Pikachu represents not just power, but memory, the return of a form once commonplace in the Pokémon world. This creates a subtle connection between the phenomenon and the broader theme of history repeating itself, a recurring motif in Pokémon lore. Acquiring this form was itself a point of curiosity. Rather than being available through normal in-game encounters, Gigantamax Pikachu was gifted as a special bonus to players who had saved data from Pokémon Let's Go Pikachu on their Nintendo Switch. This distribution method tied together multiple generations of games, rewarding loyalty while creating a small barrier that made the form feel special. For some, this exclusivity was frustrating, but for others, it added mystique. It mirrored the way older games often locked rare creatures behind unusual requirements, such as real-world events or trade mechanics, reinforcing the long tradition of rarity fueling intrigue. From a cultural standpoint, the giant mascot carried weight far beyond the game. Gigantamax Pikachu was heavily marketed in promotional material, plastered across posters, merchandise, and advertisements. Its design became a rallying point for fans nostalgic for the classic era, while also serving as a reminder that Pokémon, despite its decades-long evolution, still leaned heavily on its most recognizable figure. Events in Japan featured massive inflatables modeled after this form, blending reality with the fictional gigantification that the games portrayed. In this way, Gigantamax Pikachu blurred the line between the in-game world and the cultural phenomenon surrounding it, further reinforcing its place in history. Yet for all its prominence, this form also carried subtle oddities that intrigued dedicated fans. For instance, while its plump design was meant to echo the original artwork, certain details were exaggerated beyond what was historically accurate. The size of the ears, the proportions of the limbs, and the length of the tail differed slightly, sparking debates about whether this was a true recreation of the original design or a stylized homage. This ambiguity gave fans room to speculate about the developer's intent, further fueling discussions about how much of Pokémon's past was being preserved versus reinvented. The second focus here is Snorlax, whose Gigantamax form stands as one of the most symbolically rich transformations in the entire roster. Unlike many other Gigantamax Pokémon, whose designs merely expand their existing features into monstrous proportions, Snorlax's form evolves into a miniature ecosystem. Its enormous body becomes a living island, complete with patches of grass, moss, and even a massive tree sprouting from its belly. This design emphasizes not only the creature's immense size, but also its connection to nature, presenting it as a literal landscape within the Pokemon world. The introduction of Gigantamax Snorlax was tied to a special event shortly after the release of Sword and Shield, making it one of the earliest raid targets players could challenge. Its sheer bulk and the unique battlefield presence it carried made the raids memorable, with groups of trainers banding together to topple the massive, slumbering giant. The lore around this form described the creature as so large and sedentary that entire ecosystems could flourish on its body, creating a blend of whimsy and awe that captured imaginations worldwide. Its signature move, GMAX Replenish, added further depth to its identity. This attack not only dealt damage but also restored berries consumed by the user or its allies, weaving together combat and sustenance in a way no other Gigantamax move did. The choice of effect tied neatly into Snorlax's long-standing association with food and rest, making it thematically perfect. At the same time, it offered practical utility in longer battles, ensuring that teams could recycle healing or boosting items mid-fight. This balance of lore-driven design and mechanical usefulness is part of what made Gigantamax Snorlax stand out in competitive circles, where it became a reliable support tank in certain team compositions. Visually, the form was unlike anything else. Most Gigantamax Pokémon emphasize aggression or spectacle, giant flames, massive claws, exaggerated wings. Snorlax, by contrast, emphasized serenity. The image of a sleeping titan overgrown with vegetation suggested timelessness, patience, and harmony with the natural world. This made it one of the few Gigantamax forms to carry a philosophical undertone, reminding players that power does not always manifest as destruction. Instead, it can emerge as stability, endurance, and the quiet persistence of life itself. In terms of accessibility, this form became the centerpiece of special raids that were only available for a limited time, further adding to its aura of rarity. Players who missed the initial event had to rely on later distributions or trades, making Gigantamax Snorlax something of a prize. The fact that it required communal effort in raids also reinforced one of the series' long-running themes, collaboration. Just as trading was once necessary to complete the Pokédex, the modern equivalent became working with others to topple giants that no trainer could defeat alone. Culturally, the imagery of a living island slumbering across the battlefield resonated strongly. Fans drew comparisons to mythical creatures, such as the Japanese Namazu catfish, or even global legends of world-bearing animals, like the turtle of Hindu mythology or the whale in various folklore traditions. By tying its design to these archetypes, Gigantamax Snorlax tapped into universal stories of creatures so large they become landscapes, bridging the gap between Pokemon's fantasy and humanity's oldest myths. Beyond its immediate reception, this form also sparked broader questions about the nature of Gigantamaxing itself. If Snorlax could sustain an ecosystem on its body, what did that imply about the phenomenon? Was Gigantamax energy merely enlarging Pokemon, or was it reshaping them into manifestations of their symbolic potential? In Snorlax's case, the transformation seemed less like a size increase and more like an elevation into myth, suggesting that Gigantamaxing reveals the essence of a Pokemon rather than simply inflating it. This interpretation added richness to discussions about the lore, giving players new ways to think about the mysterious power that defined Galar's battles. In the competitive scene, while its bulk was always appreciated, Gigantamax Snorlax found a unique niche thanks to its move. Teams that relied on berry mechanics, such as those using pinch berries to restore health at low HP, found it invaluable to recycle these resources mid-battle. This created entire strategies centered around sustainability, with Gigantamax Snorlax serving as the cornerstone of endurance-based play. Its ability to outlast opponents through sheer resilience mirrored its thematic identity as an immovable object, reinforcing the tight link between gameplay and design. Taken together, Pikachu and Snorlax demonstrate two very different but equally fascinating interpretations of Gigantamaxing. One leaned into nostalgia, reviving the earliest image of the mascot while tying it to powerful mechanics and cultural resonance. The other leaned into myth, transforming a beloved giant into an ecosystem-bearing titan whose body blurred the line between creature and landscape. Both showed that Gigantamaxing was not just about size, but about symbolism, tapping into history, culture, and philosophy in ways that extended far beyond the battlefield. Among the many giants that emerged in the Galar region, a few stood out for the sheer creativity of their transformations. While some Pokémon gained minor exaggerations of their base forms, others were reinvented entirely, becoming spectacles that felt more like legendary figures than standard creatures. Two in particular illustrate how Gigantamaxing reshaped not only their appearances, but also their roles in the Pokémon mythos, highlighting both mechanical innovation and symbolic depth. The first is Meowth, a creature that has long been known as a mischievous mascot of Team Rocket, a coin-obsessed feline and one of the few species capable of human speech through anime adaptation. Its Gigantamax form, however, reimagined it in a completely unexpected way. Instead of merely enlarging its stature or enhancing its feline traits, the transformation gave it an elongated body reminiscent of a beckoning cat statue or even a creature stretched into surreal proportions. The resulting design was almost comical at first glance, yet upon closer inspection, it carried cultural references and layers of meaning. The visual inspiration for Gigantamax Meowth clearly drew from the Japanese Maneki Neko, the iconic lucky cat statue found in shops and businesses. These statues are often associated with wealth, luck, and prosperity, aligning perfectly with Meowth's signature obsession with coins and riches. The elongated body turned the normally compact feline into a towering symbol of fortune, with its eyes gleaming and its paw raised high as though beckoning prosperity from the heavens. For players familiar with the cultural symbolism, this form transformed Meowth from a simple troublemaker into a mythical representation of good luck elevated to absurd, almost divine, scale. Its signature attack, GMAX Gold Rush, amplified this symbolism even further. The move not only dealt damage, but also confused opponents and generated prize money after battle, making it one of the most unusual effects of any Gigantamax move. This mechanic reinforced the creature's association with wealth in a literal, tangible way, ensuring that every battle against it felt tied to its core identity. Strategically, the move was less impactful in competitive play, but thematically, it was perfect money and chaos embodied in a single sweeping strike. Obtaining this form also required specific conditions, as it was distributed as a special bonus for early purchasers of Sword and Shield. Players who received it had access to something that others missed if they joined the games later, giving the form an air of exclusivity. This mirrored how rare events in earlier generations often locked certain forms or Pokemon behind time-limited opportunities. The result was that Gigantamax Meowth became not just a transformation, but a collector's item treasured by those who had it and longed for by those who did not. Culturally, this form took on a special resonance. Fans compared it to serpentine creatures from myth due to its stretched out body, while others highlighted the humor in its exaggerated appearance. Yet beneath the jokes lay a deeper truth. Gigantamax Meowth captured the way Pokemon has always balanced whimsy and meaning, blending cultural references with fantastical exaggeration. It reminded fans that even a seemingly minor creature could be elevated to legendary status when filtered through the lens of gigantification. The second spotlight here is Corviknight, a species already iconic as Galar's signature flying type. Known as the region's aerial taxi service, it had quickly cemented itself as a symbol of Galar's industrial and medieval-inspired aesthetic. Its Gigantamax form expanded on these themes, transforming the armored raven into a fortress of steel and wings. Sharp edges and glowing red accents gave it the appearance of a living war machine, while swirling storm winds surrounded it, reinforcing its dominance of the skies. Lore described this form as so powerful that smaller bird Pokemon, which normally flocked around it, could be seen circling within the updrafts created by its wings. These flocks were said to be entirely under its control, acting almost like scouts or extensions of its will. This detail added an eerie militaristic undertone, suggesting that Gigantamax Corviknight was not just a solitary giant, but a commander of airborne forces. The image of an enormous armored raven surrounded by swarms of smaller birds gave it a mythological aura, as though it were a god of storms commanding an endless sky army. Its signature move, GMAX Wind Rage, was equally symbolic. The attack functioned by clearing away battlefield effects such as reflect, light screen, and entry hazards, while simultaneously dealing heavy damage. Mechanically, this made it one of the most utility-driven Gigantamax moves, dismantling defensive strategies while asserting dominance over the battlefield. Thematically, it was brilliant, an enormous raven dispersing man-made structures with a single gale, reinforcing its role as the ultimate aerial authority. The competitive implications of this were significant. Corviknight was already valued as a defensive pivot in competitive play, known for its ability to sponge hits and clear hazards with defog. The Gigantamax form essentially supercharged this role, giving it an offensive version of its utility that also punished opponents for relying too heavily on defensive setups. While not always optimal in high-level play due to restrictions on Dynamax and Gigantamax in official formats, the design nonetheless reflected a careful balance of lore and mechanics, showing that Game Freak had tied its identity tightly to both flavor and function. Culturally, Gigantamax Corviknight carried weight beyond its battlefield role. As the de facto replacement for the traditional regional bird taxi service, it was already tied to Galar's infrastructure and daily life. Its Gigantamax form elevated this further, making it not just a taxi service, but a mythic protector of the skies, a being that symbolized security, surveillance, and authority. In fan circles, its fortress-like design drew comparisons to medieval castles and even to war machines from other franchises, further cementing its identity as more than just a bird Pokemon. Symbolically, Corviknight's Gigantamax design embodied the dual themes of Galar, tradition and power. The armored plating reflected medieval chivalry and knights, while the commanding storm presence spoke to industrial dominance. This duality tied it directly into the region's lore, serving as both a reflection of history and a projection of strength. Fans speculated that the form was intended as a subtle metaphor for Galar itself, proud of its heritage, yet evolving into something more mechanical and militaristic under the influence of Dynamax energy. Taken together, Meowth and Corviknight demonstrate the breadth of creativity within Gigantamax forms. One leaned into humor and cultural reference, stretching a mischievous feline into an absurdly long icon of luck and chaos. The other leaned into majesty and symbolism, reshaping an armored raven into a storm-commanding fortress that embodied its region's identity. Both forms showcased how Gigantamaxing was never just about size, but about transformation, taking the essence of a Pokemon and amplifying it into something that bordered on myth. Among the earliest reveals of the Gigantamax phenomenon, one familiar face stood out as both a nostalgic callback and a symbol of how the new mechanic could breathe life into the oldest designs. Butterfree, the very first fully evolved bug type many players ever trained in the Kanto adventures, was chosen as one of the earliest showcases of gigantification. Instead of simply making its small, delicate frame larger, the transformation reimagined it into something both awe-inspiring and intimidating. Its wings expanded into massive, luminous panels that glowed with a radiant light, resembling moths drawn to lanterns or even creatures described in folklore that guided travelers through the night. This new design drew inspiration from both real-world moths, with oversized wing patterns, and the kaiju aesthetic often associated with Japan's monster cinema. Comparisons to Mothra were immediate and intentional, with its glowing wings and enormous size, evoking imagery of guardian deities and cinematic titans. By drawing from this cultural reference point, the developers connected Butterfree not just to nostalgia, but also to Japan's wider tradition of reimagining small creatures as protectors of nature on a mythic scale. For fans who had used it back in the Red and Blue days, seeing it return in this form was a powerful reminder of how far the series had come. Mechanically, Gigantamax Butterfree introduced one of the most unique, exclusive attacks in the form of GMAX Befuddle. This move combined damage with an automatic status effect, inflicting sleep, paralysis, or poison at random upon opponents. This randomness echoed the chaotic nature of insects in swarms, unpredictable and often overwhelming. In competitive play, the ability to inflict guaranteed status on multiple targets in doubles battles gave it situational value, though the unpredictability of which effect landed limited its reliability. Yet, from a design perspective, it was perfect, a giant insect that could overwhelm not just with physical presence, but with debilitating conditions that disrupted opponents' strategies. The rarity of obtaining this form further reinforced its mystique. Gigantamax Butterfree was among the earliest raid battle encounters when Sword and Shield launched, meaning players had to seek it out in max raid dens with the right conditions. The element of communal effort in these raids meant that for many, catching this towering butterfly was not just a personal triumph, but a shared experience with friends or online allies. The result was that this form became tied to the early days of exploring the Galar region, a sort of rite of passage for those diving into the new mechanics. Lore-wise, the transformation elevated the butterfly motif into something almost spiritual. Pokédex entries described its wings scattering scales that caused status effects, and the Gigantamax version magnified this ability into an all-encompassing phenomenon, as though its very presence altered the battlefield's environment. Some fans speculated that its glowing wings symbolized guidance or protection, making it not just a combatant, but a guardian figure within the lore of Gigantamax. On the cultural side, Butterfree's role in the anime further enhanced its impact. Many fans remembered the emotional farewell episode where Ash released his Butterfree to join a mate in migration. The Gigantamax form gave that memory a new layer of significance, as though the humble creature players once released had returned, larger than life and imbued with power worthy of legend. In this way, the form tied nostalgia, culture, and gameplay into a single, towering image. The second focus here is Alcremie, one of the most thematically unique Pokemon introduced in Galar. Known for its association with sweets, cakes, and cream-based forms, this fairy type already embodied the themes of celebration, hospitality, and joy. Its Gigantamax transformation leaned into these motifs with full extravagance, reshaping it into an enormous tiered cake that towered like a festival centerpiece. Unlike other forms that became more intimidating or monstrous, this one embraced whimsy, making it one of the most light-hearted examples of gigantification. The cake form carried heavy cultural symbolism. In Western traditions, tiered cakes are tied to weddings, celebrations, and unity. By giving Alcremie this form, the developers reinforced its identity as a Pokemon of companionship and joy, but they also added an amusing twist, a literal dessert turned into a battlefield titan. For many players, the humor of sending a giant cake into battle contrasted sharply with the usual dramatic imagery of monsters clashing, making this form an instant fan favorite for its sheer absurdity. Its signature move, GMAX Finale, embodied these themes perfectly. The attack not only dealt damage, but also healed allies on the battlefield, making it one of the few moves that reinforced companionship directly within battle mechanics. This dual purpose reflected the creature's lore as a partner that spreads happiness, while also providing real strategic utility in doubles battles, where healing and damage in one move could swing momentum dramatically. Though it never dominated competitive play, it carved out a niche as a support-oriented Gigantamax that embodied the cooperative spirit of the mechanic. The sheer variety of Alcremie forms before gigantification added another layer of rarity to this evolution. Trainers could obtain dozens of flavor and decoration combinations through unique spinning mechanics, each one tied to specific items and times of day. When one of these forms transformed into its Gigantamax version, the effect was universal. The cake tower emerged regardless of base form, creating an amusing juxtaposition between the small details of its normal state and the grandeur of its Gigantamax state. Collectors relished the challenge of obtaining every possible base form, then experiencing the spectacle of gigantification afterward. Symbolically, this form represented Galar's emphasis on culture, community, and celebration. While many Gigantamax Pokemon drew from kaiju imagery, folklore, or intimidation, Alcremie's design leaned into themes of joy and unity. Fans speculated that it was inspired by both wedding cakes and the elaborate desserts often displayed during festivals in Europe, aligning perfectly with Galar's British-inspired cultural roots. This connection reinforced the idea that Gigantamax was not just about scaling up power, but about scaling up identity, turning traits into spectacles. The community reception to Gigantamax Alcremie highlighted how the mechanic could balance humor with impact, Memes quickly spread about trainers battling with a literal cake, while competitive players experimented with GMAX Finale as a niche support tool. At the same time, fans noted how its design tied into deeper themes of companionship, food culture, and celebration, making it one of the most layered Gigantamax designs. Its combination of absurdity, lore, and cultural resonance ensured it stood out among the many giants introduced in Galar. Together, Butterfree and Alcremie illustrate the extremes of Gigantamax design. One took a nostalgic creature from Kanto and elevated it into a luminous titan reminiscent of kaiju guardians, blending lore, mechanics, and cultural memory. The other turned a light-hearted dessert-inspired fairy into a colossal cake of celebration, weaving joy and support into its very attacks. Both showed that gigantification was not a one-size-fits-all process, but a creative reinterpretation of what each Pokémon represented, scaled to mythic proportions. Few Gigantamax forms embodied the celebration of Pokémon's history quite as clearly as Pikachu and Eevee. These two creatures were already cultural icons long before the Galar region introduced gigantification, and their transformations served less as reinventions and more as tributes, tying the present to the origins of the franchise. Both forms leaned into nostalgia, drawing inspiration from the earliest depictions of these beloved creatures, while simultaneously creating mechanics that emphasized fun over raw competitive dominance. For Pikachu, the transformation represented a deliberate callback to its earliest design. Instead of the slim, athletic proportions that the mascot gradually took on over the years, the Gigantamax form returned it to its original, chubbier self, as seen in the artwork of the late 1990s. This decision resonated deeply with longtime fans, many of whom remembered the so-called Fat Pikachu era with fondness. Seeing it return in gigantic form was both humorous and heartwarming, as though the franchise itself was winking at its own history. The bright yellow cheeks glowed with electrical energy, and the creature's tail became a jagged bolt stretching upward like a lightning rod, emphasizing both its power and its iconic silhouette. Mechanically, the form introduced the exclusive move GMAX Volt Crash, an attack that dealt damage while also paralyzing all opponents on the field. This effect mirrored Pikachu's long association with status-inflicting electricity, but scaled it up into a spectacle that only gigantification could achieve. While not necessarily dominant in high-level competition, the ability to spread paralysis to multiple targets made it a fun and occasionally disruptive option in raid or doubles battles. More than anything, it reinforced the idea that Gigantamax Pikachu was meant as a celebratory form, one that leaned into fan service and charm rather than raw utility. Obtaining this form required a specific event distribution, as it was given to players who owned play records of Let's Go Pikachu on their Nintendo Switch. This requirement tied the form directly to another nostalgic project, further reinforcing the sense that it was a gift for those who had engaged with Pikachu's history across multiple titles. For collectors, this created an immediate sense of urgency, as missing the event meant missing out on a piece of franchise legacy. Culturally, the form also reflected Pikachu's broader role as a mascot. The decision to revive its earlier design highlighted how deeply the community's collective memory influences the franchise. Fans who grew up with the rounder, cuter version saw this as a direct tribute to their childhood, while newer players were introduced to an earlier aesthetic that many might not have recognized otherwise. This bridging of generations emphasized Pikachu's role not just as a playable creature, but as a cultural ambassador for the series as a whole. Eevee's Gigantamax form carried a similar spirit of nostalgia, but leaned into its own unique traits. Known for its incredible number of possible evolutions, Eevee represented potential and adaptability, but in this transformation, the focus shifted toward exaggerating its most endearing qualities. Its fur fluffed outward into an enormous mane, making it look both majestic and comical at the same time. The design emphasized softness and cuteness on a monumental scale, essentially turning the small fox-like creature into an oversized embodiment of affection. The exclusive move tied to this form, GMAX Cuddle, was as unusual as it was fitting. The attack inflicted damage while also infatuating opponents of the opposite gender, making it one of the only Gigantamax moves to focus on emotional manipulation rather than raw power. This quirk aligned perfectly with Eevee's reputation for charm and companionship, while also introducing a competitive niche that was more humorous than practical. The move was rarely used seriously in high-level play, but its presence reinforced the creature's identity as more of a partner than a powerhouse. Like Pikachu, obtaining this form required a specific connection to Let's Go, Eevee, making it another event-exclusive gift that rewarded longtime fans. This exclusivity gave the form cultural significance beyond its battlefield utility, turning it into a collectible that symbolized a trainer's broader history with the series. Those who missed the distribution often expressed regret, adding to its mystique as a limited-time treasure. From a design perspective, the transformation reflected the developer's willingness to embrace cuteness as spectacle. While many Gigantamax forms leaned into intimidation, Eevee's design doubled down on softness, suggesting that not every Titan needed to be threatening. This decision showcased the variety of interpretations possible under the Gigantamax system, reinforcing the idea that gigantification could highlight any aspect of a Pokemon's identity, whether humor, menace, or affection. The cultural reception of Gigantamax Eevee was similarly enthusiastic. Fans appreciated the way it leaned into the creature's role as a symbol of adaptability and companionship. Memes proliferated about being smothered by the enormous mane of fur, and fan art often depicted the form as an overwhelming pillow of fluff. These playful interpretations reflected the joy that the form was meant to inspire, even if it was not intended for competitive dominance. Together, Pikachu and Eevee's Gigantamax forms illustrate how gigantification could serve as a tool for nostalgia as much as for reinvention. Both designs reached back into the franchise's past, one reviving the rotund mascot of the earliest days, the other exaggerating the charm of a creature known for its versatility. Their exclusive moves, while not necessarily game-breaking, reinforced their identities perfectly, making them memorable additions to the Galar phenomenon. Most importantly, these forms reminded fans that Gigantamax was not just about spectacle, but about storytelling, tying mechanics, lore, and cultural memory into one cohesive experience. Among the many giants introduced during the Galar era, two stood out not only for their size, but for the sheer creativity of their transformations. Snorlax, already one of the most iconic creatures in the series, and Kingler, a crustacean that had often been overlooked in earlier generations, each received Gigantamax forms that redefined how fans perceived them. Their transformations highlighted the range of ideas that the mechanic could explore, from ecological symbolism to exaggerated physical traits. For Snorlax, Gigantification emphasized its role as both a force of nature and a humorous presence. Normally depicted as a sleeping giant blocking roads, its Gigantamax form turned this image into a literal battlefield. Instead of simply growing larger, its body became a foundation for an entire ecosystem. Grass, trees, and even massive plants sprouted from its stomach as it lay sprawled across the ground, transforming it into a living island. The design suggested that this creature was so massive and immovable that the natural world adapted to grow on top of it, blending humor with an almost mythological grandeur. The lore behind this form painted it as a Pokémon that could alter its environment by doing nothing more than sleeping. This tied directly into its long-standing reputation for laziness, while also exaggerating it into something legendary. The idea that an immobile being could sustain plant life reinforced themes of balance in nature, where stillness could foster growth. For many fans, the design immediately evoked imagery of Studio Ghibli films, where large, sleeping beings often symbolized guardianship and harmony with the natural world. Its exclusive move, GMAX Replenish, carried practical and thematic resonance. The attack not only dealt damage, but also had the chance to restore berries consumed during battle. This mechanic linked directly to Snorlax's well-known appetite, reinforcing its identity as a creature defined by food and rest. Competitively, the move gave it utility in sustaining itself or allies through healing items, making it situationally powerful in doubles formats. The combination of lore, humor, and strategic value made Gigantamax Snorlax one of the most memorable additions to the phenomenon. Acquiring this form required participation in special max raid battles during limited time events, adding another layer of rarity. Players who managed to capture it often shared stories of the challenge, as its enormous bulk made raid battles feel particularly daunting. The limited distribution also gave it a status similar to earlier event Pokémon, ensuring that those who caught it felt as though they had secured a special piece of franchise history. Culturally, the reception was overwhelmingly positive. Fans praised the design for balancing comedy with majesty, turning a beloved but simple Pokémon into a spectacle that felt fresh without betraying its identity. The imagery of an island-sized creature resonated with mythological motifs worldwide, from tales of sleeping giants to legends of living landscapes. By connecting Snorlax to these traditions, the design elevated it beyond humor, placing it among the most inspired Gigantamax forms. Kingler's transformation was strikingly different, but no less memorable. Known as a water-dwelling crab with enormous claws, this species had often been overlooked in favor of flashier water types. The Gigantamax form changed that perception by exaggerating its already distinctive features to monstrous extremes. Its single massive claw became even larger, glowing with crimson energy, while its body sprouted foamy bubbles that cascaded outward like frothing waves. The result was a design that combined the ferocity of a predator with the chaos of the sea. Lore described this form as a Pokémon whose claws could generate enough pressure to crush anything, while the foam it produced filled the battlefield, disorienting opponents. The visual of bubbles flooding the arena reinforced its association with water's overwhelming power, turning something normally seen as playful into a symbol of destruction. This transformation captured the essence of Gigantamax, taking a defining trait and amplifying it to the point of myth. Its exclusive move, GMAX Foam Burst, fit this theme perfectly. The attack not only dealt significant damage, but also lowered the speed of opposing Pokémon, simulating the way foamy water could slow movement and reduce visibility. This utility gave Kingler a niche role in competitive formats, particularly in doubles, where speed control was often critical. Though it never became a staple of high-level play, the move ensured that the form had mechanical depth to match its striking design. Obtaining Gigantamax Kingler required searching for specific dens in the Galar region, making it rarer than standard encounters. The process of hunting it down often led to stories of persistence and luck, as players scoured max raid battles for the chance to capture it. This rarity enhanced its value, especially for trainers who had long championed underappreciated species. For them, seeing Kingler elevated to such grandeur was a vindication of its overlooked potential. Culturally, the design was praised for highlighting the raw, chaotic power of the sea. The foamy bubbles spilling from its body were interpreted by some as a nod to folklore about sea monsters that stirred the ocean into a frenzy. Others noted that the design leaned into Kingler's role as a crustacean predator, exaggerating its natural abilities into something monstrous. The reception underscored how even Pokémon, once considered minor, could be reimagined as titans under the Gigantamax system. Taken together, Snorlax and Kingler demonstrate the diversity of approaches within Gigantamax design. One transformed stillness into spectacle, embodying the concept of a living island that nurtured life while asleep. The other turned natural ferocity into a chaotic flood, overwhelming opponents with sheer force and disruption. Both forms reminded players that Gigantamax was not just about size, but about reinterpreting identity, finding new ways to make even familiar creatures feel larger than life. Gigantamax design often pushed existing traits of a Pokémon into exaggerated extremes, turning recognizable features into monumental spectacles. Two examples that showcase this in dramatically different ways are Machamp and Coalossal, one rooted in physical prowess and the other in industrial might. Both demonstrate how the mechanic could amplify themes beyond size, transforming them into icons of Galar's mythology. For Machamp, the transformation was a natural extension of its identity as the ultimate fighting type. Already renowned for its 4 arms and immense strength, the Gigantamax form pushed this reputation to mythological levels. Its body grew even bulkier, muscles bulging with exaggerated definition, and its fists glowed with radiant energy as though forged from raw power itself. The visual was less of a simple enlargement and more of a stylized depiction of martial perfection, resembling deities of strength from folklore and comic book heroes alike. The lore emphasized its newfound ability to launch punches so powerful they could generate shockwaves visible from miles away. This tied directly to its long-established reputation for moving mountains and lifting massive objects, but magnified it into a natural disaster on par with earthquakes or hurricanes. In this form, Machamp became not merely a fighter, but a force of nature, embodying the very concept of overwhelming physical dominance. Its exclusive attack, GMAX Chi Strike, underscored this theme by increasing the critical hit ratio of both itself and allies, in addition to dealing damage. Mechanically, this effect made it unique among Gigantamax moves, as it reinforced its identity as both a leader and a powerhouse. In competitive play, the move could create high-pressure situations where battles turned on unexpected bursts of damage, echoing the unpredictability of martial combat. The ability to inspire allies through sheer presence reflected its lore as a Pokémon that could act as both a warrior and a commander. Culturally, This form connected to imagery from multiple traditions. Fans drew parallels to mythological figures like Hercules or Japanese Oni, while others compared its glowing fists to superhero aesthetics. The result was a design that felt both timeless and contemporary, bridging global mythologies of strength with modern pop culture references. The reception was enthusiastic, as many felt that Machamp had finally been given the grandeur it deserved, no longer overshadowed by newer fighting types, but elevated to legendary status through gigantification. Obtaining Gigantamax Machamp required searching raid dens in Pokémon Sword, where it was version exclusive. This exclusivity gave it an added layer of rarity, as players of Shield had to trade for it or rely on special events. The result was that its form became both a badge of persistence and a symbol of dedication to completing collections. For longtime fans, seeing one of the original Kanto fighters gain such a dramatic form felt like both a tribute and a reward. Coalossal's Gigantamax form took a very different direction, embodying not martial strength but industrial power. Already designed as a nod to Galar's coal mining history and industrial heritage, the gigantified version exaggerated these traits until it resembled a living volcano. Flames erupted from its body, molten lava dripped from its rocky frame, and its back became a towering furnace blazing with industrial fire. The design suggested not only raw elemental might, but also humanity's long history of harnessing fire and coal as sources of power. The lore described this form as capable of unleashing heat so intense it could rival volcanic eruptions, with flames visible from distant horizons. This imagery tied directly into Galar's cultural backdrop, which drew heavily from Britain's Industrial Revolution. By turning Coalossal into a living representation of furnaces and smokestacks, the design highlighted the region's blending of natural forces and human industry. It became more than just a Pokémon. It was a walking symbol of Galar's industrial identity. Its exclusive move, GMAX Volcalith, was one of the most distinctive of any Gigantamax attack. The move not only inflicted initial damage, but also caused residual damage over 4 turns to any non-rock type opponents, simulating the ongoing destruction of volcanic eruptions and molten debris. Mechanically, this gave Coalossal a unique niche in competitive battles, allowing it to apply passive pressure while supporting allies with utility moves. In doubles formats, it synergized particularly well with strategies that exploited its unique typing and ability to trigger Steam Engine, granting massive speed boosts when hit by water or fire moves. The competitive scene gave Coalossal surprising attention because of these synergies. While not a top-tier threat in all formats, it became a creative centerpiece in doubles strategies, often paired with Pokémon that could deliberately activate Steam Engines safely. This clever use of mechanics turned an otherwise overlooked Rockfire type into a strategic powerhouse, showing how Gigantamax could elevate even niche Pokémon into relevance. Culturally, the design was praised for its symbolic depth. Fans noted how it tied into broader environmental themes, with some interpreting it as a commentary on industrial power overwhelming nature. Others highlighted how its resemblance to volcanoes and furnaces blended natural disasters with human innovation, reflecting both awe and danger. This duality made it one of the most thematically rich Gigantamax forms, sparking discussions that went beyond gameplay into cultural analysis. Obtaining Gigantamax Coalossal was limited to Pokémon Shield, reinforcing the version-exclusive nature of many Gigantamax forms. As with Machamp and Sword, this exclusivity created an incentive for trading and collaboration, emphasizing the communal aspects of the franchise. Players who caught it often shared raid experiences of battling through its blazing attacks, making it a memorable addition to their collections. Taken together, Machamp and Coalossal demonstrate the thematic diversity of Gigantamax design. One represented physical perfection and mythological strength, embodying the timeless archetype of the warrior. The other embodied industrial fire and volcanic destruction, representing both natural forces and human innovation. Both forms reminded fans that gigantification was not simply about making creatures larger, but about exploring the symbolic extremes of their identities, elevating them into spectacles worthy of legend. Among all the Gigantamax forms that have ever appeared, few have reached the level of iconic recognition as Charizard. From the earliest days of the series, this fire-breathing dragon has stood as one of the most beloved Pokémon in the franchise, a symbol of strength, nostalgia, and adventure. By the time Gigantamax mechanics were introduced in the Galar region, there was no question that Charizard would receive one of the most dramatic and visually striking redesigns. Its fiery wings became colossal torrents of flame that stretched like burning rivers into the sky, with embers flowing off them like lava from a volcano. Unlike its standard form or its mega evolutions from the Kalos era, this version leaned heavily into the spectacle of fire, embodying the idea of an unstoppable blaze that could consume everything in its path. What makes this design particularly fascinating is how it reflects the developer's ongoing desire to reimagine Charizard while keeping it fresh for each new generation. By the time Sword and Shield released, fans had already seen two distinct mega evolutions, and the challenge was how to make Gigantamax Charizard feel new and not redundant. The answer came in exaggeration. Its wings were transformed into literal streams of flame, something no other form of Charizard had done before, and its body was accentuated with glowing patterns, as though molten energy pulsed beneath its skin. These details cemented its role not just as a fan favorite, but as the poster child for Gigantamax itself. In fact, Leon, the champion of Galar, used Gigantamax Charizard as his signature partner, ensuring that nearly every player encountered this form in the climactic battles of the story. The lore significance of this form is subtle but powerful. Unlike regional variants or mega evolutions that often have backstory tied to experimentation or adaptation, Gigantamax forms are explained as rare phenomena that only certain individuals of a species can achieve. In Charizard's case, this rarity amplifies its legendary status even further. Leon's Charizard is described as being exceptional, not only in training but also in its ability to tap into this rare phenomenon, which ties directly into the theme of Galar celebrating spectacle and grandeur. For many fans, seeing Gigantamax Charizard towering over stadium crowds became the definitive visual of the generation. It was not just another alternate form, but a centerpiece of the region's culture, directly tied to the spectacle of Dynamax battles. From a mechanical perspective, Gigantamax Charizard introduced a special move, GMAX Wildfire. This fire-type attack not only dealt immediate damage, but also left lingering flames on the battlefield that continued to burn non-fire opponents for several turns. This effect was both thematic and strategic, creating a new layer of pressure in competitive play. Unlike most entry hazards or status conditions, GMAX Wildfire could only be set up through Gigantamax itself, ensuring that battles involving this move felt distinct and powerful. In doubles, it provided incredible utility by dealing chip damage to both opponents, forcing them to scramble for solutions before the residual flames whittled their teams away. What makes this particularly unusual is that the lingering flames did not behave like traditional burn status, but more like an environmental hazard unique to Charizard. This highlighted how Gigantamax moves were not just stronger versions of standard attacks, but entirely new mechanics designed to differentiate these forms from the baseline Dynamax system. Design inspirations for this form can also be traced back to broader cultural imagery. The idea of wings made of flame is a recurring motif in myth and fantasy, often associated with beings of divine or destructive power. By giving Charizard this aesthetic, the developers reinforced its mythic reputation. Fan reception reflected this as well, with artwork, merchandise, and even tournament promotions heavily featuring this form. Charizard had already been a marketing icon for years, appearing on countless cards, posters, and anime episodes, but its Gigantamax form added fresh imagery that extended its cultural footprint even further. There is also an interesting connection between Gigantamax Charizard and the early beta designs of Pokémon. Some concept sketches from the 1,990 seconds show unused dragon-like creatures with flame wings or body patterns that glow as though heat radiates from within. While these designs were never used at the time, Gigantamax Charizard seems to channel a similar aesthetic, as though the idea of a fully fiery dragon had lingered in the developers' minds for decades before being realized in the Galar era. Fans have often speculated that this form represents a culmination of what Charizard was always meant to be, not just a dragon-like creature, but a living embodiment of flame itself. In terms of competitive history, Gigantamax Charizard held a unique role. While its base form and mega evolutions had dominated various formats in earlier generations, this form had to compete with other Gigantamax Pokémon for usage. The residual damage from GMAX Wildfire made it a strong choice, particularly in doubles where it could pair with Pokémon that appreciated the constant chip damage wearing down opponents. Its ability to sweep with powerful fire-type moves, combined with the extra bulk from Dynamaxing, ensured that it was a threat in the right hands. However, its reliance on sun support or strong team synergy sometimes limited its potential. Still, its presence was always felt due to its iconic status, and many players included it simply for the thematic satisfaction of commanding such a towering flame beast in battle. From a storytelling perspective, Charizard's Gigantamax form also played into the anime. In the Pokémon Journeys series, Leon's Charizard was frequently shown using its Gigantamax powers, giving viewers a sense of the spectacle that the games depicted. This reinforced the connection between Charizard and the concept of ultimate battling prowess, reminding audiences of its enduring place in the franchise's mythology. Merchandise such as trading cards also elevated this form, with highly sought-after Charizard cards featuring the Gigantamax design fetching huge prices among collectors. The trading card community has always had a special attachment to Charizard, and this form became yet another reason for it to remain the most popular Pokémon card of all time. Beyond all these details lies the cultural weight of Gigantamax Charizard as a phenomenon. Every generation of Pokémon introduces new mechanics, but not all of them resonate equally with the fan base. Mega evolutions captured attention in Kalos. Z-moves had mixed reception in Alola, and Dynamax was debated heavily in Galar. Yet, Gigantamax Charizard managed to transcend those debates. Whether players loved or hated Dynamax as a whole, Most agreed that Charizard's Gigantamax form looked stunning and deserved its place in the spotlight. Its fiery wings, glowing patterns, and grand presence encapsulated everything the Galar region wanted to convey: battles as entertainment, larger-than-life spectacle, and Pokémon as cultural icons. While Charizard represents the fiery spectacle of Gigantamax, Grimmsnarl embodies an entirely different side of the mechanic. Known for its mischievous and sinister aesthetic, this dark and fairy-type Pokémon already stood out among Galar's roster for its eerie design, which resembled a monstrous goblin or troll with hair-like appendages wrapping around its body. When it assumes its Gigantamax form, these hair-like tendrils expand into a towering mass that resembles a living nightmare, part demon, part trickster deity. Its figure stretches into a towering giant with elongated limbs and a hunched posture, as though it is pulling the strings of an invisible stage. The design takes inspiration from dark folklore, particularly European tales of trolls, ogres, and fey tricksters, which fits perfectly with the Galar region's cultural themes. Where Charizard burns like a blazing star, Grimmsnarl looms like a shadow on the horizon, a presence designed to unsettle as much as to impress. Gigantamax Grimmsnarl's special move, GMAX Snooze, reflects this unsettling aura. Unlike standard fairy or dark type attacks, this move damages the target and has the added chance of putting opponents to sleep on the following turn. This delayed sleep mechanic is highly unusual, introducing a new form of status interaction that is rare even within the vast move pool of Pokémon. Thematically, it plays into the idea of Grimmsnarl lulling foes into a nightmare state, almost like a folkloric bogeyman drawing victims into slumber. Mechanically, it created mind games in competitive play, as opponents had to weigh whether they could risk staying in and potentially losing a turn of action due to sleep. This was one of the more unique Gigantamax moves, highlighting how the developers used the mechanic to experiment with new forms of disruption beyond simple damage boosts. The lore significance of Grimmsnarl's Gigantamax form ties deeply into the concept of fear and dominance. While many Gigantamax forms emphasize spectacle or beauty, this one leaned into intimidation. Its towering, demonic silhouette suggested a being that existed more to inspire dread than awe, which stood out in contrast to the otherwise celebratory nature of Dynamax battles. In a way, it reflects the duality of Pokémon itself. While most forms embody companionship, fun, or adventure, some designs remind players of the darker side of mythology, where creatures are not always friendly companions, but forces of chaos or terror. Gigantamax Grimmsnarl is a direct embodiment of that tradition, blending the mischievous trickster archetype with the imposing menace of a titan. From a design standpoint, Grimmsnarl's Gigantamax form also highlights one of the most creative uses of scaling in Pokémon history. The idea that its hair grows so massively that it forms armor-like appendages and weaponized tendrils is rooted in the concept of body horror, where natural traits become exaggerated to unsettling extremes. Yet, at the same time, it fits neatly within the logic of Gigantamax, existing traits amplified to the point of absurdity. Just as Charizard's flames become rivers of fire, Grimmsnarl's hair becomes a monstrous cloak, reinforcing its identity while pushing it to a surreal extreme. Competitive players often saw Grimmsnarl as one of the most useful utility Pokémon in the Galar formats, thanks to its prankster ability granting priority to disruptive moves like Reflect, Light Screen, and Thunder Wave. Its Gigantamax form added yet another layer of disruption through GMAX snooze. While not always a damage powerhouse, the threat of delayed sleep forced opponents to play cautiously, and in doubles formats, this created openings for its partners to capitalize. Unlike Charizard, which was often used for direct offense, Grimmsnarl was more of a strategic tool, shaping battles through psychological pressure as much as raw power. This distinction shows how diverse Gigantamax mechanics could be. Some forms focused on overwhelming force, while others thrived on subtle manipulation. The cultural reception of Gigantamax Grimmsnarl was also notable. Its design immediately sparked comparisons to gothic artwork, heavy metal aesthetics, and even anime villains, cementing it as one of the most distinctive new Pokémon of the Galar era. Fans created countless pieces of fan art, memes, and theories about its design inspirations, many pointing to its resemblance to creatures from Norse and Celtic mythology. Others connected it to the imagery of monstrous fae or the concept of changelings, where beings from folklore infiltrate human lives to cause mischief or harm. Whether admired for its creativity or criticized for its unsettling appearance, Grimmsnarl's Gigantamax form undeniably left an impression, and that is exactly what the mechanic aimed to do: create memorable, larger-than-life versions of existing Pokémon. Together, the contrast between Charizard and Grimmsnarl showcases the full spectrum of Gigantamax as a concept. One embodies fire, light, and heroic spectacle, while the other represents darkness, trickery, and intimidation. Both, however, are united by their sheer scale and the way they amplify existing traits to mythic proportions. Gigantamax as a whole was not just about making Pokémon bigger, but about turning them into living legends within the context of the Galar region. By choosing such different directions for these two Pokémon, the developers demonstrated the flexibility of the mechanic and its ability to capture both the celebratory and the sinister sides of Pokémon mythology.